The first talk in this session is going to be by Jamie Dahl from Central State University Extension and Amy Stone, who is from Ohio State University Extension. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jamie and Amy and let them take over.
All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and get us started. Jamie, if you want to advance the slide. We were asked today to talk about some insects that you may encounter. Hopefully, we don't want you to encounter these invasives, but at least they should be on your radar screen. Today, your classroom is kind of your digital device, but tomorrow, hopefully, you'll be outdoors in the woods enjoying, even with these cold temperatures that we're supposed to be receiving. Go to the next slide. So can anybody identify this moth? You know, often I think when we talk about invasive species, it's usually about the ones that were on the receiving end. And sometimes we don't mention that it's a two-way street. And I always kind of like to start off the conversation. And so on the next slide, if you didn't know what the moth was, if I showed you this or you saw this out in the woods, you may know, go ahead, that's fall webworm. And fall webworm is a native insect. It actually was detected in China in the 70s, and they actually call it the American white moth. We've got some native biological controls here to keep it in check, but unfortunately those biocontrols didn't make its way to China. And so they are having really some outbreaks and some serious defoliation, particularly in their fruit crops. And so just wanted to kind of start out with that, you know, we're in a global society and these non-native tree pests really are a worldwide problem. Go ahead. We're going to start out with one that's been on the radar for a long time, and actually was one that is kind of near and dear, unfortunately, to my heart. Was the one that found the first infestation of emerald ash borer in Ohio, in Lucas County. A woodland owner was looking at his ash trees and just didn't think something looked right. And so the map you'll see on the right-hand side gives you really a clear picture of where we know this insect is. So very widespread, will not be eradicated. But what we're seeing now, if you could advance the next slide, is kind of the aftermath. And so the two top photos are kind of photos in more of an urban setting of a lot of street trees were ash that have now succumbed to emerald ash borer. But then when we think about more the woodland setting, we see a lot of ash snaps. Ash trees do not stand very long after they die, and so they become very brittle and very dangerous. And so this is where maybe some of you are kind of in that process. And then finally, when we think, gosh, we're all done with emerald ash borer, another invasive pops up, and those invasives are the invasive plants that we have to deal with where the ash once stood. Go ahead, Jamie.
Sorry, Amy.
Oh, you're okay. The next insect on the radar is the gypsy moth. And gypsy moth has actually been in North America since the 1800s, when it was actually brought in by a European scientist or artist, kind of a combination hat that he wore. And they escaped while he was trying to develop a better silkworm. And so right now we've had egg mass hatch from the southern part of the state all the way north. We had hatch in Lucas County over the weekend. And so that's what you'd be seeing right now, are these very tiny small caterpillars. Go ahead. As those small caterpillars feed, they become large. And what's really interesting about gypsy moth caterpillars, there's really nothing else like that when you see them as, you know, 5th, 6th, 7th instar, are these pairs or rows of dots. You can see on the head end, They start out to be blue and then transition to a red color. And they are leaf-eating machines, and so they can cause defoliation in the forest pretty rapidly. Oaks are their favorite, but they'll feed on hundreds of different types of deciduous trees and shrubs, and also some of our evergreens like spruce and pines. Those caterpillars are going to pupate kind of in the summer, June timeframe, and then emerge as adult moths. In the photo on the far right, the moth on the left, more of a brown color, is the male. He flies during the day in a crazy zigzag pattern, searching out the female, who really doesn't fly. She's really heavily loaded with eggs, and so she gives off a pheromone in which then the male is drawn to her. Next slide. In Ohio, we're kind of unique in the situation where we actually have 3 different zones or areas when it comes to gypsy moth. So the red area is the suppression zone, an area where gypsy moth has been an issue or a reoccurring issue. The yellow area, the slow the spread, is actually kind of, you imagine, that leading edge. And the goal in the slow the spread program is to kind of push that leading edge back into the suppression zone, or at least hold that line pretty tightly. And we also in Ohio have an eradication area. And so if there was a find of gypsy moth in one of those purple counties, ODA would actually come in and do some eradication efforts of that small isolated population, not of the gypsy moth population as a whole. Next slide.
Okay, so now we're going to transition here into one that I'm certainly still learning things about, and I think we all will be, but a really important one on the horizon is the spotted lanternfly. And I know one of our thoughts with today's A Day in the Woods was, what are things that people can be doing out there on their properties right now? And this is something that we hope you don't find, but we need your help to be watching for it. And we have some concerns that eventually we might be finding it here in Ohio. So this is a very serious non-native pest. It's a pretty attractive insect, but it is called the spotted lanternfly, though it is actually not a fly. It's a plant hopper. Again, definitely an invasive pest, native to parts of Asia, and was discovered in southeastern Pennsylvania in 2014. And then unfortunately, early this year, it was found close to the Ohio border in 2 counties nearby in Pennsylvania. So some of the concern with spotted lanternfly is that its hosts include agriculture crops and some trees in our forests. So what we really need is folks to help us out with detection on spotted lanternfly. So if it would be found, we need folks to report it immediately. And really, if you're unsure, just report it and we can figure out if it is or is not spotted lanternfly. And so you would report to Ohio Department of Agriculture, or you could use your local cooperative extension office, or via the Great Lakes Early Detection app, which Amy is going to talk about a little bit more at the end of this, this session. So the other interesting thing with spotted lanternfly is, unfortunately, it doesn't just rely on its own ability to move, it hitchhikes quite well. So it will attach to vehicles, lay its eggs, particularly on all surfaces. It actually is laying a lot on metal surfaces, including vehicles and train cars, for example. And then so checking vehicles, especially if you're moving through some of these infested areas, is critical. And then, as usual, our message of to not move firewood, because that's another way we really aid these pests, all of these pests in moving. So I'm going to move through some of this quickly, and so my hope is you all will go maybe familiarize yourself more with spotted lanternfly after this talk, but its preferred hosts are tree of heaven, so another invasive, an invasive plant that you may be familiar with. It also really likes grapes, but there are potentially so far 70 host plants. We're still figuring out some of its preferences, but some other things that it seems to be found on include multiflora rose, sumac, walnut, willow, maple, and others. And so Ailanthus, though, is really a key here. That is its preferred species. And so when we're talking about active things you all can do on your property, knowing where your Ailanthus is and managing it would be a really good start. So quick points on Ailanthus identification, some things to know about. Is the bark. So starting kind of young trees, real green, but then it looks like this kind of cantaloupe looking bark. It can grow it grows fast and can grow into a large tree. It has I'm going to show here a pinnately compound leaf, and so those leaflets coming off the stem have a lance shape. An important thing about those leaflets, if you notice the edge, it's a smooth edge, and some of the other species that could be lookalikes, such as walnut, hickory, sumac, they would have a serrated edge, so that's a way you could tell it apart. Other big things with Ailanthus, if you smash the leaves or break it off, it's pretty stinky. I say rancid peanut butter is the one that resonates with me, but you can pick your stench. And then it has these little glandular bumps at the bottom of the leaflet. Let's see, some other quick images of things you might see as looking at it on your property. But then also noting what the seeds look like there. And this is a tree that causes issues on the property, spreads like crazy, and now with spotted lanternfly, we have one more good reason to manage it. There may be a talk coming, well, there is a talk at the end of the session where perhaps they'll talk more about Ailanthus, I'm not sure. So to dig a little bit more now into spotted lanternfly, we're borrowing a lot of things from Pennsylvania in our education here in Ohio because they've been dealing with it for a while. So here is the life cycle, and so in one generation that you see kind of the movement from egg to the different nymph instars, so the different phases of nymph to the flying adult. And so an important thing to note is that certain times a year you could see multiple phases of the insect. And so this time of year, what you might see is potentially eggs. So they're laid in these columns with a waxy coating, and then kind of changing in color over time. This is the overwintering stage. You see they're about 1 inch long. And then something to note is that gypsy moth egg masses, there are some similarities, but there are differences there in the coloring. So egg masses is something that you can watch for, and that is, if we do end up getting it here in Ohio, it's something that you can manage too, scraping the eggs. And then the next thing that we could also be starting to see this time of year is the nymph. And so the nymph in this first to third instar would be the black body with the white spots. It could be perhaps confused with a tick, maybe, but it looks different and it would move much faster than a tick. And then the fourth instar is the red body with spots, the white spots, and these would be jumping. And the nymph does cause damage, piercing into the phloem of the bark and branches. So just to kind of review some of that, and I know we're throwing a lot at you, but basically there is overlap. So again, in May, we could be seeing eggs and nymphs. And then in certain parts of the summer, we could be seeing nymphs and adults. And then there's also a magical time in late summer, early fall, where we might be seeing eggs, nymphs, and adults. So again, not detected in Ohio yet, but we are definitely on the lookout. So the adults would be much more showy and more obvious, and so that's something to be on the lookout for later this summer. And so I'm going to just summarize some of this detection stuff. So the egg masses, the nymphs, and right now it would be the black nymph with the white spots. There is sap flow that is caused by the insect. So this is a lot of times something people see first. And then it will also collect at the base of the tree, and there sometimes then follows black sooty mold. And then this heavy sap flow, the honeydew, the different things that the damage causes often also attract buzzing and stinging insects. So sometimes that's what people note first actually on their property. And then here's an image of what that honeydew and sooty mold would look like. So lots of information, and I apologize for moving through, but we're kind of rapid fire here. But basically, we encourage you to look up more information about it, report any suspected finds to, again, Ohio Department of Ag, Cooperative Extension, or this app that Amy's going to talk about. Check your vehicles, don't move firewood, and seek out professional assistance, which is available. Ohio State has a website started, go.osu.edu/. There's a couple different options there, but SLF will work. There's an effort that is underway to coordinate. There is a fact sheet available that was co-done between OSU and Central State. Penn State Extension has great resources, and they are dealing with management there already. And then, of course, our own ODNR Division of Forestry has various invasive pest resources as well. And with that, Amy's going to share some more on the app.
All right. So once you get out in your woods and start to see some invasive things, we would actually love for you to report them through the Great Lakes Early Detection app. I had mentioned just on the slide, hemlock woolly adelgid is part of the app, as well as Asian longhorn beetle. Next slide. The app was actually developed. It can help us monitor population cycles going up and down, maybe a pest that is establishing a leading edge, or monitoring for new hotspots, or in the case of spotted lanternfly, monitoring for the initial detection or the establishment of the insect here in Ohio. Next slide. The slides are going to show you, just kind of get you familiar with what the app looks like, and maybe some of you have already downloaded it, but it's full of different categories based on the invasiveness here in Ohio and the Great Lakes region. Next slide. You can see here, if you choose tree, you'd scroll down and see the list of the invasive trees that are there. You can also see additional images as well as information, maps where it's currently been reported using the app, and then you can also make those reports yourself. Next slide. So Jamie already talked about Ailanthus or Tree of Heaven, and that's one that we're really trying to promote with the spotted lanternfly. So if we can get individuals out reporting Tree of Heaven or Ailanthus, those will then be logical spots where we can actually go back and look for signs and symptoms of the spotted lanternfly. Next. As you work through the app, it's really an educational tool. You can read more about the different invasives. We utilize the EDD maps, and so you'll actually have your own username and password, and then all your reports will go through that map site. Everything has to be ground truth before it becomes an official red dot on the map. Next slide. But it'll take the longitude and latitude. You can actually describe if it's a single spot or a large area, how large the area is. You'll want to take a photo of what you're seeing, because that's what we'll use initially to determine if it can be a report that is added to the map. Next slide. And there, I see a question from Alan. The app is called the Great Lakes Early Detection Network app. We'll also, Dave, I've got a quick how-to guide on the app if there are people who are interested that need additional instructions on how to use the app.